So here's little Cleo representing the rainy season so beautifully. That was quite a while ago now. She's quite a bit bigger than that. But yeah, the lovely Cleo. And then there's another picture of me and one of our church planters in Cambodia, because Cambodia are known for rainy season. They have a lot of rainy season. But the good thing is it's warm rain. And it's like, it's not like cold rain like you get in England. So, but quite a few of our locations do have a rainy season. So I thought it'd be good to cover that. So we're going to look at rainy season. And, we're looking at Ecclesiastes, that there's a time for everything under heaven. And it talks about there's a time for war, but there's also a time for peace. And, it's all very well finding peace and having a peaceful time in our lives when everything's going calm and hunky-dory, but when we're in a storm and a rainy season, that is when we really need to find peace in the storm. So we're going to have a look at how we can do that today, because most of us don't really like rain. Have you noticed that people run for cover, don't they? I've got lots of umbrellas here. I won't pick one up now, I'll spoil the display, but a lot of people run for cover, don't they? I mean, we were on a beach once as a family. It was gorgeous. I think it was in Spain. And we were all there on the beach. The beach was packed out. And then all of a sudden it rained. And within a moment, the beach was completely cleared. I was like, where's everyone gone? And we just, as a family, as you can imagine, being the wild dog family, Snowsall, we just all dived in the sea because we were like, well, we're going to get wet anyway. And it was so great being in the sea, in the storm, and it was pouring with rain. We were already wet. So we had the whole beach and the whole sea to ourselves. It was the best thing. But we are a bit crazy like that. But the rain can catch us out, can't it? Because we don't expect it. And I never seem to be prepared. I never have my umbrella with me. But I want us to be women who learn to dance in the rain. And sing in the rain. It's all about praise and finding joy, isn't it, in every season. And as a kid, I'm going to show my age now, but we have, you do know that I'm quite seasoned. We've learned my favourite film actually was Singing in the Rain as a kid. I mean, can you imagine singing in the rain? That really is showing my age now. Where this guy is in this suit and he's dancing and singing in the puddles, off the pavement, into the puddles, singing. He's got his tap shoes on, he's dancing in the rain. And I always think, this is such a picture of joy. This is what I want to be like when I grow up. I want to be someone that learns to dance and sing in the rain. Now, as you know, I have a lot of kids. I'm quite greedy like that. I have 5 boys. And so I was at the school gates for a good many years. I think it was probably about 17 years. I used to go every day to pick my kids up from school. And it's a great way to chat to people while you're there. But if it was ever going to rain in the daytime, it would always rain at 3:00 and cause absolute chaos on the roads and the kids, and I was always unprepared. I would never have my umbrella, and I was always the mother at the school that looked like a drowned rat. And but this one day I was at the school and I thought, I've got my coat on today. It's 3:00. It's raining again. Got my coat on, got my hood on, got the big fur around. Couldn't really see much, but I was dry, so that was good. And then when I got there, it was absolutely pouring down with rain. So I ran up and took cover under the porch that was above the school doors. And I waited there, and I was leaning like this for about 2 minutes, just leaning, not really talking to when I had my hood up, couldn't really see much. And then after about 2 minutes of leaning, the pole that I was leaning on started moving. And I looked round and I was like, oh my goodness, I am so sorry. It was not a pole at all. It was a man. And I was like, I had been leaning on this man, and bless him, he didn't move an inch. Until about 2 minutes, he was like, she is taking the mick. And then I turned around to him. What do I say? I'm like, I am so sorry. I thought you were a pole. And I mean, who says that? I actually said to someone, I thought you were a part of me. Talk about everyone matters. So anyway, it was not a great day. So don't always follow my example. But thankfully, he did laugh. And I did apologize and called him a pole. But I had a chance to invite him to church because that's what you do at the school gates, right? You lean on people, you call them poles, and then you invite them to church. And so I just want to put this photo up again. because do you remember we talked about whatever season we're in, there's never an off season. There is always a time where we should be sowing those seeds into the soil. We should always be sowing out, and especially in a rainy season where we can so easily be focused on ourselves. Let's be looking out, because if you focus on other people and others and reaching out to them, it takes the focus off your own problems, and that's a great way to learn to dance in the rain. But storms do come pretty unexpected, don't they? They come out of the blue, as they say. And if you're coming out of a storm now, some of you might be coming out of a storm. Some of you might be in one right now, which, we'll be praying for you. Or some of you, if you're not in one, you might be headed for one, but you don't know it's coming yet. Because that's quite often, we always hit storms in our lives, and they are unexpected. But some of us are so quick to blame the enemy for storms in our lives. Or we're like, why are we being attacked? I'm getting attacked again. Some of the storms we face are actually because of disobedience in our life. Let's face it, some of the reasons we're in a storm is because we're doing something God has asked us not to do. We can be there, can't we? When we're all together, it's easy. We're there praising God. We're having a great time on a Sunday, praising Him all together. It's all good. We're surrendering our lives. We're saying, Lord, I lay my life down. And then sometimes we come out of the building and we get tested. This happened to me and G the other day in Waitrose, where he thought I had my purse. I thought he had the card. We bought a load of shopping, got all the bargains. And we got to the till, and basically it was a big fail because neither of us had anything to pay with, and it was pretty embarrassing. But those little things happen, don't they? You're tested, and he had just spoken at church about failing well, and I just reminded him of that because he was annoyed with me. So I was like, you remember that message you just spoke? But it's true, isn't it? We can be there praising Him. But when we hit a storm in our lives, it's so easy, isn't it, to question Him. Like we can question God. Why is this happening to me? Why are we going through this? I can't believe that we're having to face this right now. Why? Are we going to question Him, or are we going to trust Him? Because, we are called to trust Him. Are we going to trust Him or not? That's a choice. Are we going to trust Him or not? Or are we going to question Him? Because tests and trials are going to come, whatever, and really, it will prove what's in our heart at the end of the day. When that storm comes, it really does. You get what you're prepared for in a way. But maybe you're going through a storm because He also puts us through things to glorify Him. We go through things, don't we? Because we're supposed to be an example and a witness and to glorify who He is. And that's why we need to trust Him in the storm, because we don't see the bigger picture, but He always sees the bigger picture. He always knows what's ahead. And so He's a great person to trust, isn't He? And, anybody that comes and dies on a cross for you, I would pretty much say is someone you can trust. Right, and yet we find it so hard, we so easily question instead of trust Him. So let's have a look at this verse here, Luke 8:22. It's just a very short verse. One day Jesus said to His disciples, let's go over to the other side of the lake. So they got in the boat and set out. Simple, just going over to the other side. You don't expect a storm when you're just going over to the other side of the lake. And like I said, it comes unexpected. And that day, the wind hit the lake, and all of a sudden they found themselves in a storm. And Jesus was having a nap. He was asleep, having a great dream of something. And but the disciples were like, Lord Jesus, we're going to drown. I mean, they were in a really dangerous situation. They were just going from here to there, and between here and there, they were hit this storm, and they thought they were going to drown. And in a way, they were questioning Jesus, we're going to drown. Don't you care? They were questioning Him, and they were in great danger. And what did Jesus do? He got up, and He used His authority, didn't He, to speak to the storm, and He rebuked the storm, and He brought calm and peace immediately. And they were like amazed. They're like, who is this guy? He even can make the storm calm. And then Jesus turned around, and what did He do? He said to the disciples, where is your faith? Where is your faith? And I want to ask you that today. When you hit a storm in your life, where is your faith? because that's what, Jesus asked them, because they had the same authority in them as he did. They could have left him asleep, but no, they got him up because they didn't use their authority. And we need to use the authority that God has put in our lives to actually speak to the storm we're in and actually declare scripture over it, to pray into the storm instead of running to Facebook and putting our storm or our rainy day on Facebook. It's like Facebook is always saying, what's on your mind? Well, Jesus wants to know what's on your mind more than Facebook does. So who are we going to trust? We need to learn to bring peace and calm to the storm, because if we're leading people, like even leading your family, and you are letting the storm hit you around from here to there, and they're seeing all of this, they need to see that you can take authority over the storm and speak peace to the storm. And God's given us that voice to use. People are watching us. People are reading us, and they need to see our example in how we deal with the storms in our life. So where is your faith? Who are you going to run to? Where have you put your hope? These are all questions that are great questions to ask. Are you going to trust him or not? So let's have a look at Isaiah 26, 3 and 4. See, this is all about peace, finding peace, and it's amazing. You will keep in perfect peace those whose minds are steadfast because they trust in you. So finding peace is very much linked to trusting him, which is what I'm trying to say. For the Lord himself is the rock eternal. And where are we going to build our house? On the rock eternal. And Jesus, what did he do? He was just about to face the biggest storm of his life when he went to the cross for us, for you and for me. He went to face that storm. Like, we've got to look at his example. Who did he go to? He didn't go to the disciples. He did ask them to pray. And of course, they fell asleep. Ask them what they have to say. Some of us go to our non-Christian friends. But Jesus, no, he went to his Father, didn't he? We need to remember who we go to. Who are you trusting? So he went to the Garden of Gethsemane, and he went to his Heavenly Father. And then Jesus went on to face the biggest storm where he was spat on, he was whipped, he was persecuted. He hung on the cross for you and for me. And what did he do? He reached out. He was still reaching out and loving others, and he still loved them, and he still died for them. His name is still trashed, isn't it, today? And yet he came to die for us, which is absolutely awesome. And yet sometimes we find it hard to forgive a neighbor. It's like, we need to keep going back to his example, and not have a natural response to things and to storms in our lives, but to have a supernatural response. So we have to be prepared and be on our guard, because like I said, a stormy season, a rainy season comes without any notice. So how are we going to do that? We're going to do it by building our house upon the rock, like I just said, the eternal rock, because foundations are everything, right? I've learned a lot about foundations over the years, because we built a few houses, and the very first house we built, I remember thinking, gosh, this is a lot of money, like putting into the ground for the foundation. What a waste of money. You can't even see anything. And then as we were digging the foundations, we hit the riverbed. And so that was a big problem. We had to pour even more money into it. And we ended up having to build our house on a floating raft on the river. But yeah, it was crazy. I was like, what on earth are we doing? Then when I went to see the foundations, I was like, I can't believe how much this has cost us so far. You couldn't even see anything. I was like, it's so tiny. And then of course when it goes up that way, it looks bigger. But I wanted to get to the nice rooms and the pretty bits where I could put the interior design and the nice things in the house. But you can't do all those things if you haven't done the hard work, the hard graft, and the foundation, because that is what will keep it standing. And, I would say that some of the foundation is seeking his kingdom first. So what do you put in the foundation? What do you put in first? You put in the foundation. And it says to seek his kingdom first. So I would say that is a foundation thing, that we seek his kingdom first. And another thing that we do first is love him with all of our heart, mind, and soul. That is the first commandment. And that, again, it's a first thing. It's a foundation thing. And then everything else will fall into place. And that's his promise to us. And I just want to really encourage all of you who work with the kids in our church, across the movement, all of you that give up your time and volunteer with our kids, because you are sowing foundations into our kids. And we are so thankful for that, because it is so important. And you don't always get to see the fruit of that foundation. And it's hard work sometimes on a Sunday, and it takes a lot out of you. But you are building foundations into our children for the future, where they're, talk about making disciples. That's what we're called to do. And I just want to encourage you as mums. It's hard day in, day out, sowing into your kids and putting those foundations in, but it will be so fruitful in the future, because you are storing up treasures in heaven, and I thank you for everybody that is giving into our kids' work. Thank you so much. And all the mums out there, we are cheering you on, because it says when you bring up a child in the ways of God, they will not depart from it. And even if they disappear for a while, they are going to come back. And I really believe that. So we have to be storm-proof, don't we, in the storm? And, building your house on the rock, Jesus the rock, makes you pretty storm-proof. And we have friends who actually have not a storm-proof house. We have some friends in America that have a hurricane-proof house. I didn't even know there was such a thing, but apparently there is, that you can get hurricane-proof windows. And so anyway, a few years ago, we were in South Carolina, and they thought we were in England, and I got in touch with her husband, my friend's husband, and said, look, we're going to surprise Debbie, because she's a big planner. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool to, someone who's a big planner, they're always planning things for everyone else, and we were going to go and surprise her. So we were like, okay, we're going to go from this area that we were staying in, South Carolina, and travel about 3.5 hours to them. So just before we did so, he got in touch. He was like, I know you were thinking of coming and surprising Debbie, but I'm really sorry. I don't know if you've heard, but Hurricane Matthew is on its way. And we were like, Hurricane Matthew? It sounds very British. And we were like, do you know what? Well, he said that the whole of Charleston was evacuated, and all the surrounding area, the government had decided to evacuate the whole area. He said it will actually, even if you want to come, it will be impossible for you to get through. So we had to think about it, and we watched the news, and it was talking about body bags and how dangerous it was and everything. And then we decided to go. We were like, we are not letting Hurricane Matthew, stop us having our fun. So we got in touch, and we said, we've decided we're going to come down anyway. He was like, but you won't get through. There's roadblocks everywhere. So we were like, well, we're just going to try. So our other friends said, you better take some food with you in case you get stuck. Do you want some snacks? We were like, no, we'll just take a can of Coke. We'll be fine, We us Brits, we don't need a lot, And so anyway, we drove down, and needless to say, the roads were really quiet. It was actually the best journey ever, because we drove and all the traffic was coming out, and it was very busy that way. And we were just had the whole road to ourselves. And then Gary, as we got closer, Gary said, what are you going to say if we get pulled over by the police? I'll just say, sorry, officer, but we're British. And I'm sure that'll be fine. And they'll let us through if I just say we're British. And anyway, we didn't get stopped. We got to a roadblock, and then we went round that roadblock, and we come to another roadblock and diverted past that one till we got quite close. And it was so weird, because this place is always so busy. It's like a big city, and it was like a ghost town. There was no cars, there was no people, everything was shut. There were limbs everywhere. Not the human kind, I mean limbs of trees everywhere. And so anyway, we got to just round the corner from our friend's place, and we phoned him, and we said, we're just round the corner. And he was like, no, you're not. You can't be. but the worst of the storm had passed through. And he said, you can't be. He said, we're busy clearing up all the limbs and the mess everywhere. And he said, how did you get through? And we said, well, we're here. And so he then, so she still didn't know. She still thinks we're in England, because I didn't put anything on social media. I was like, this is going to be a real surprise. And so he told her that in the outhouse there was a leak. And so Gary and I sat on the sofa in this outhouse. And she walked in, and honestly, I wish you could have seen her face, because it was the most amazing. She was like, you kidding me? And I won't tell you what other words she said. But anyway, she was so shocked to see us. And we were sat on the sofa. And it was almost like Hurricane Matthew had blown us in from England. She was so shocked. And it was brilliant. And needless to say, we had the most amazing after party, after hurricane party. And nothing is impossible in a storm if you have the right foundations. But the next day, it was so funny. It was the most, because after a hurricane, I don't know if you know this, but the day after is the most perfect weather. It's absolutely beautiful. And it's funny because if you head into a storm and you get into the center of the storm, that is where you have the most peace. It's very peaceful in the middle of the storm. And it was like, that's what we did. It was amazing. And I was so glad that we did that. And it was the most amazing surprise. But it also taught me about finding peace in the storm. Because, when you are in a storm and, the waves hit and you're being hit around and you're like, what's coming next? The foolish guy that's built his house on the sand, that is going to wash away. But what happens when you build yourself on the eternal rock is it gives you staying power. It gives you staying power. If you seek his kingdom first, it will give you staying power. If you love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul, it will give you staying power through the storm. So let's be wise master builders and build our house on the rock. And I remember, when we were prayed for actually by, I think some of you haven't met him yet, but Clem, who's a prophet. And he came and he prayed over us when we were nearly losing everything. And he said, I've been faithful to build your house because we managed to keep our house. And he said, and now I want you to be faithful to build mine. And, and that's exactly what we're doing. So I love building his church. But as we know, personal storms can come in, can't they, and move with lightning speed and devastate the landscapes of our heart. And we never even saw it coming because it's so shocking. Like sickness can come and hit people. And it's so shocking when it happens because, again, you don't expect it. Financial loss. We nearly went through bankruptcy at one point, which wasn't actually our own fault, but we had to face that. And it went on for years, where we had to really face that storm. And we didn't want our kids to know that we were going through a storm. Because if you let that affect you every day, it's going to affect the whole family. And then loss, like losing parents, losing loved ones, miscarriages, people go through so many storms in their life, depression, divorce. There's so many things that we can face. But I just want to say at this point that not all storms that happen are bad. I know that sounds weird, because there's something that happens in the storm that actually will never happen when you're lying on a sunbed. And there is actual purpose in the storm, because that's when you learn most about yourself, but also makes you realize that you have built you have got your foundations on the rock. And even, I know I talk about this a lot, but it's because it shocked me so much that when it came out of the blue, when we heard about Jordan, I was like, he's one of our healthiest boys. And when we found out he had to have brain surgery, again, I was questioning. I was like, God, why? Why is this happening to us? We're serving you. We're building your church. And Jordan's having to face this terrible thing. And then I started to change my perspective and trust him in the whole thing, because I started to thank him, because I said, well, thank God they found this thing on his brain. It's a whole different perspective, because it changes your perspective when you're grateful. And I started to thank him, because I thought if they hadn't have found it and we hadn't have gone on the stormy journey of the operation and then recovery, it would still be there right now. And he could have died at any given moment, because they said, he could get meningitis from it and it could take his life. And so, even in the storm, we can be grateful for things. And just another example of this is a guy who was on a desert island. He got washed up. He was shipwrecked. He was the only survivor. And he managed to build a little house for himself. And that was like his refuge. And then after he'd been there for about a few weeks, he was like running out of food around him. So he thought, I'm going to have to go and explore. So he went further afield, went and looked around the island, found some more food. And he came back and he was absolutely devastated, as if being washed up and shipwrecked wasn't enough. His little house had burnt down. It was like, so I think the embers from the night before, the fire, the wind had come and blown it into his house. And so he had no home and no shelter. And he was like giving up hope. And then he fell asleep on the sand that night. The next morning he wakes up. And for the first time in like weeks, he saw a ship on the water. And he couldn't believe his eyes. So he ran over, and these guys had come off the ship to find him. And he was like, how on earth did you find me? And he was like, because of all the big smoke signals yesterday that were going up in the sky. So the devastating thing that happened to him actually saved his life. So sometimes, there is purpose in the storms that we're going through. And some of that purpose is that we glorify him in all of it. But, we've been through times where, like I said, we were bankrupt, we were losing everything. And I remember God speaking to me through, this was a different time, another guy, and he prayed over me. He didn't know our situation. He didn't know what we were going through. And, as women, we care about the details, don't we? We care about the little things. And he said, God is going to bless you with material things. And I almost laughed, because I thought, that's so funny. We're in the middle of like nearly losing everything, and he's going to bless me. And I was like, I'd never really prayed for material things. It wasn't something I was chasing after. I just wanted to keep our home at the time. But, what about that verse where it says, cast all your cares on him? Because he cares for you. He does care about the little things in our lives. And so let's learn to cast all of our cares on him and trust him in the storm. I just want to take a moment as well to speak into the rainy day attitude, because I think some of us, even if we don't have it, we were brought up in the rainy day attitude. And what I mean by that is, when people say, oh yeah, I'm just saving all that for a rainy day. And they're almost like, in the back of their mind, they're saving up this money because they're expecting and they're waiting for a rainy day. And I get the fact, it's good to have savings, but I was brought up, my dad was a warrior. He was a fearful guy. And I don't think I realized how much until perhaps now when I look back, that I was brought up in that rainy day attitude. And he never took my mum anywhere. They never really went on holiday. They didn't really do things. And because my dad was like worried and fearful, probably because of the way he'd been brought up, and he was saving everything for a rainy day. But that robs you from living today. And that's what I want to say. And I remember him buying a phone in our house, which was like I know it sounds funny to you probably, but that was like a really big deal. We had our first house phone. And I remember my mum was so excited. And I walked in one day and I was like, Mum, what are you doing? She was lying horizontal on the floor on the phone to someone. I was like, what? Why are you lying on the floor talking to someone? And she was like, because my dad was outside, and she didn't want him to see her, like, on the phone, basically, because she was worried, because he didn't like her using it very much. And, it was funny at the time, but those things are so sad. And I just think, like even me, when I was going out with Gary then, I would never ask to use the phone because like my dad was so like funny about it. So I'd have to cycle down to the phone box in the village and put my money, because we didn't have mobile phones then. It makes me sound really old, doesn't it? And then I would get in the little phone box and speak to him on the phone. But some people are so fearful about money and about the rainy day and about they have that rainy day attitude. And I want to kick that out of us and say we have to outrun that fear. There's so many fears in us that we need to outrun. And I want to encourage as well to look for rainbows. Look for rainbows. Look for his promises in the rainy and stormy days. I mean, nobody had a longer rainy season than Noah. He had a pretty long rainy season. I think it was 40 days and 40 nights, wasn't it? And yet God's faithfulness to him and his family was so evident. And, God is near. He is near to us. And even in the storm, he is near and he helps us overcome. So maybe you are in the middle of a storm right now. And I know I've said some of these things, that I've been through. And some of you on the other side of the camera have been through far worse than me. I know some of your stories. And some of you have been through some of the most awful things that anyone should ever go through. And yet God is saying, he wants to speak to you and he wants to say, I am close to you. I'm not just close to you, but I am with you in the storm. I am with you in the storm. He sees you. He knows you. He cares about the detail. And, those of us who have been in storms, I just want to encourage you because, okay, some of the storms we've been through are hard, but we are still here. Right? We're still here. Look, we're still here. We're still standing. And we have faced the storm. We have come through the other side because we trusted him. And we know that he knows the bigger picture. And we are still here and we are still standing. And we used to have a little saying, me and Gary, we used to say, whenever we would had a really difficult season or a really rainy day or like a stormy season, we would always say, God is still on his throne. He is still on his throne. Even if we've had a rainy day or a difficult day, he is still on his throne because he is sovereign, right? And I just want to read these scriptures because these are to do with peace. And it's about finding peace in the storm. And these are amazing scriptures I'm just going to read to you. They're so powerful. So the first one, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. So when we're in a storm, we need to find that peace that will guard our hearts and minds. And it says, I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world, you will have trouble. You will have trouble. We will have storms. But take heart. I have overcome the world. It's brilliant, isn't it? I love that. And here's the last one. Peace I leave with you. My peace I give you. I do not give you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled and do not be afraid. I love that. So all those scriptures are really going to help us through our rainy season and rainy days to find that peace in the storm. I love it. So peace is not the absence of trouble, is it? But it's the presence of Christ. It's not the absence of trouble. It's the presence of Christ in us. Stay connected to him. Stay connected. And peace is resting in his victory. He has overcome. And we are resting in his victory. It's already been done. It's already been won. So whatever you're going through, I want to encourage you today to remember who you are and remember whose you are. And let's put our umbrellas down, shall we? Let's put our umbrellas down and face the storm and trust him and find peace in the storm. Amen.